I'm John Brink, and we are podcasting on the Brink from central British Columbia, Canada. And for all those people that are watching us around the world and saying, okay, we know where Canada is in British Columbia on the West Coast, right? Right. And we are in the center of British Columbia, a beautiful, beautiful province. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Nichole Daher. And Nichole is an autism mom with a healthcare background who founded success on the spectrum after facing a long, heartbreaking wait list and realizing no parents should have to fight this hard for care. Nichole, tell us a bit about your background and so where did it all start, and then obviously when one of your children was born with what you realized was autism and went through the battles around that. So start with the beginning, and so that we get a general idea as to how you got to where you are today.
Of course. Well, in 2014, I got married to a man with a child with autism. So I was stepmom to a 5-year-old little girl that I had no idea how to take care of. And because I had no background in autism and no experience with autism, it was a very harsh and quick learning curve for me. She was enrolled in ABA therapy, which is what doctors recommend to treat the symptoms of autism. And it was really effective and very helpful for her. And ABA therapy also includes parent training. So that's where I started learning about all of the methods that a parent can do to help their child learn new skills and to reduce problem behaviors like tantruming or self-injurious behavior or aggression. So I was kind of thrown into this world.
Oh, let me go back to the acronym you used, ABN. What did you use there?
ABA therapy stands for Applied Behavior Analysis.
Okay.
So they look at a child that may be nonverbal and they decide, why is the child doing this? What is the function of the behavior? And after we figure out why they're behaving in this way, we can help modify that behavior to something that's more appropriate.
So that is generally accepted by the medical profession globally, or is it just the United States, or is it regional, or is it?
Globally, it is the golden standard of treatment, and really it's the only recommended treatment because there's no medication that will cure autism. So it has to be done with behavior modification protocols, and hard work.
Yeah. And it's only really now you already have a healthcare background yourself as a nurse, I presume. Would that be correct?
Actually, I'm a nuclear medicine technologist.
Oh
So
my
yes,
goodness.
it sounds fancier than it is, promise.
Oh my
But
God.
yeah, it
I
was
see
healthcare.
going to the moon and to Mars, but it's not quite like that. Okay.
Not quite like that. It's more like X-ray and MRI and CT. It's a diagnostic imaging modality, but obviously nothing to do or not related at all to children or to autism. So it wasn't really helpful to have that healthcare background.
Right. So that you got married in 2014, and the new partner in your life, or the husband in your life, had a daughter of 5 that already was diagnosed with autism, I believe, and
Yeah.
and struggling, but it was a whole new experience to you, as having, you knew about autism, but you had not been directly, as it would be in this case, involved in it. So it was a whole new experience for you.
Absolutely. It was scary, but I learned a lot from it.
Yes. And so take us then further in terms of saying, success on the spectrum of autism. So what brought you to that, the long waiting list, and realizing that it was a real struggle for many, many others that were going through it or were enter into it? The waiting list It's no different in Canada, I believe. Was very,
No
very
different at all.
yes. And
Very difficult.
you kind of, from your perspective, because with your background and being taught structure around health related issues, you knew
Mhm.
something had to be done, and you then looked at potentially starting a process being entrepreneurial that would attack the issues relating to the waiting list and then franchising it, in fact. So tell us about that part.
So when I first became stepmom, she was already enrolled in an ABA therapy clinic, and it was doing wonders for us, and we loved it. But what I didn't realize is that the vast majority of ABA clinics in the entire United States and in Canada only focus on early intervention, which means they only serve children up to age 6 years old. So
Oh,
when she turned 7, it was this huge problem. And she was kicked out or, aged out of the program that she was in. And in my head, I thought, well, you don't take kids over 6, no problem. I'll just go find somewhere that does, right? And I thought it would be very simple, but it wasn't. The very few places that did accept children over the age of 6 had those very, very long waiting lists. I mean, 6 months to a year. And even then, no guarantees that you'll get it. And you just have to get on the waiting list and hope. And it wasn't that wasn't going to work for me. I wasn't going to stand for that. She needed the help. I didn't want to wait. 6 months of a child's life is a huge waste of time. And
exactly.
it would have put us, she would have regressed back into some of the behaviors that we had already overcome.
It's
And
a
I didn't want
critical time, right? So at that age,
critical.
critical.
They're learning so fast at that age, and you really have to utilize and take advantage of that brain growth. And so someone, I believe it was my husband that said, well, if all these places have a waiting list, business must be good. You should open one. And I was like, you know what? I think I will.
Yeah.
So my idea was to start a very small thing, little business as a tax write off just for her. I wasn't going to quit my job. It was going to be very simple. I was just going to hire someone to treat her and maybe have a couple other kids to help pay for the salary of this behavior analyst. And it was just going to be this little tiny thing, right? Right, John? Just a little thing. And when I announced on Facebook, hey, I'm starting this business for children over 6, who wants in? I got an overwhelming response. 30 people, I think, within a few hours contact me and said, where's the admissions form? I want in. Let's do this. I want to get him in as soon as possible. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm not the only mom looking for this. This is a huge need, a huge demand is just sitting and waiting. So I rented a large office space. We started this business. We brought in more kids. I quit my nuclear medicine job. And before I knew it, I had a clinic of 30 kids shoved in this little tiny office space. And it felt so good, not just to help my own daughter, but to help the other kids too. It was just as rewarding. And I was reliving all those first moments that I had with her and making a difference in their lives. And it was a happy place to be.
So the interesting part of it is, just for the people watching us from around the world, is that autism is well known, but not so much yet, because it's still all recently that people started dealing with it, understanding it to a certain extent, and somewhat scary for others that even when they find out about it, maybe looked at, it falls into the category of neurodiversity issues, correctly? And so there are a whole grouping of particular issues that fall in that, like including myself, I'm ADHD and have dyslexia. So, and I call it a superpower actually. But in any event, so I know all about it, and so that part of it. So share with us the frequency of occurrence And I kind of read up on it a little bit, something like 1 in 67 or 68 children will be affected by autism. Is that correct? And then the other part I read about it is the frequency of occurrence in males is usually 5 times higher than females. And so those are things that I did not realize. And then the other part about it is that just again sharing with us around the world that are still not fully knowledgeable about that, but what are the typical indicators that it may well be autism or prior to diagnosis, and there may be places around the world where they don't even deal with it, but give us some typical examples of that. So starting with frequency of occurrence, next one male, female, and then the typical indicators that it may well be autism or neurodiversity issues that makes a person different. That's what it did with me. Although it took me till I was 62 until I was diagnosed, and up to that point, I was wondering, who am I? Who am I? Why am I different? You know, so
And a lot of us wonder that. But yes, to your point, we didn't know a whole lot about autism until recently. And the more and more we know about autism, the easier it is to diagnose. And so recently, the Centers of Disease Control released a new report that said that as of 2025, 1 in 31 children will be diagnosed with autism.
I'm not
And so the
surprised.
rate of occurrence is going up. So more and more kids are being diagnosed. And most children, 10 years ago, the average age of a kid being diagnosed with autism was 5 to 8 years old. And now that is decreasing, and we're starting to notice autism symptoms much earlier, which is a good thing because, like you said before, when a child is young, it is a critical time to teach them new information. Their brains are like sponges. So the earlier you get help for a problem, the better the outcome. So now kids are being diagnosed as young as 18 months old. Now, autism is a developmental delay. And if you want to think about it very simply, it's my body is physically 5 years old, but mentally I am 2. A 2 year old eats with their hands and not with a fork or a spoon. A 2 year old does not speak verbally or have the language of a 5 year old. But some of these physically 5 year old kids will not be potty trained, will not be able to feed themselves. They don't have verbal language, and mentally they cannot process complex thoughts like a 2 year old is not able to do that. And so if you suspect that your child is not hitting those developmental milestones, that by 3 they should be able to do this and by 4 they should be able to do this, if they're not on par with their normal aged child peers, then autism is suspected, and you can go to a pediatrician and have them tested for that. Now, it's not a physical test, it's not a blood test. It is just an observation of the child's skill levels. And children with autism, just like ADHD, it's not that they can't learn new things or they can't learn how to talk. They're physically capable of it. They just need to be taught in a different way, in a nonverbal way. And that's what ABA therapy is. Now, what I didn't know when I first opened my own ABA therapy clinic was the demand for it. Because so many children are being diagnosed every year, the number of providers, the number of clinics that open is not keeping up with the higher and higher number of kids being diagnosed. And so what we have is this huge demand and very low supply, which really is sad for the kids, but is a huge business opportunity for people wanting to open these clinics, because over 50% of children that need this therapy don't have access to it.
No.
Because either there's no clinic around them in their area, or because the clinics that do exist are already full and there are waiting lists.
So would I be correct in suggesting that, and I've gone through this with ADHD, is that the frequency of occurrence, what I saw on Google selecting to be 1 in 67 or 68, and now have been corrected to 1 in 31, the likelihood is that even that number is likely higher than even 1 in 31. It could be, well, 1 in 20.
You're correct, because they're guesstimating that 1 in 31 kids are diagnosed, but there are still several kids that are not diagnosed that do have autism that exist. And so statistically, this is what, 2.5% of the population. It's very high.
Huge.
If you think about your child going into a typical classroom, you have about 20 or 30 kids in a classroom. That means statistically, there's going to be one autistic kid in every class that has autism or will be diagnosed with autism at least. So it's a very high occurrence, and I don't think a lot of people realize how common autism is. And I don't think autism is more common now than it was back then. I think we're just recognizing it and defining it better. So there are a lot of adults out there right now that have autism and don't know it. They were never told. Like you were diagnosed with ADHD so late in life. The same thing is happening with our adult population.
They just thought I failed grade 3 and I failed grade 7 3 times, and they said to my parents, I grew up in Holland, Northern Holland, and they said to my parents, what are you going to do with this guy? And then some people suggested send him to the mentally challenged school. They said, no, we're not going to do that. So that being said, then, so obviously, it is extremely unfortunate at the time. That was reality, because I'm going to be in the next week, next Saturday, actually not this Saturday, next one. I'm going to be 85 years young. So, and then having been ADHD and dyslexia for 62 years, and then going to school, they say, well, John will not amount to much. The teacher said, he's probably will not, because he's always the least successful in class with tests. And so that kind of stuck always with me in a way, but not totally obsessed me, because I knew that I was just as smart as the others. And I had to, but it had an impact on my life and the things that I did. And already saying that I was born in 1940 in northeastern Holland, it doesn't take much imagination. That was at the beginning of the World War II, and we saw far too much that we should not have seen. PTSD was part of my life, the inner child. Add to that ADHD and dyslexia. I was a bit of a basket case, to put it mildly. So, but
well, you sure showed them.
So the other part, Nichole, then, the frequency of occurrence is, again, looking at Google, saying 5 times higher in males than it is in females. Is that correct, or is that speculation that not really, because why would it be is my question. And so what is it?
Boys are more likely to be diagnosed because
and
girls can fake.
The operative is diagnosed?
Diagnosed. It doesn't mean that, we don't know how many kids have autism until they're diagnosed, but
Correct.
Boys are 5 times more likely to be diagnosed, mostly because girls know how to fake it. It's called masking. Females, just by society, maybe or may not be genetically, but we are far more social creatures than males are. And so when the symptoms of autism mostly affect social activities, social cues, and social behaviors, the girls go unrecognized because they just can barely sneak by the bottom criteria if they know how to mask, if they know how to fake it.
And they're good at that.
And their girls are good at faking it.
And so the same applies to, and just throwing this in from my personal experience, with ADHD, in my case, and dyslexia is obviously I was a good writer but not a good reader, but ADHD in particular is that the suggestion was initially when I started to look at it, was 6 to 8% of the population. The more I found out about it, is the more I realized the frequency was much higher. And
Yes.
but the interesting part about me is the same happens to autism. I would suggest is that I already was. I knew there was something different about me, and so making it a little bit more interesting in a way. We were liberated by the Canadian Army on April the 12th, 1945, and it made such an impression on me that I knew always that I would go to the land of my heroes, Canada, and I did when I was 24. The other reason was that I still had issues with who am I? and
Hmm.
and and knowing that I was just as smart as the others that went to college and university, and and I had to kind of, in my mind, reconciling this. I had to start anew again, and
Yeah.
so and then the dream of going to Canada became important to me, and then the other part is that I wanted to build a lumber mill, and it has a connection to my dad was in lumber, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. And then that means I had to go to British Columbia. That's where all the trees are. And I wanted to start with nothing, so I had a suitcase, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and very little money. And I flew into July of 1965. I flew into Montreal, took the train from Montreal to Vancouver, 4 days, 5 nights. My God, that is a long way. And so then came to Vancouver, went to the immigration department. I couldn't speak English, I didn't know soul, didn't have a job. And fortunately, there was a German fellow, and he said, I said to him, I could speak some German, and I said, I want to build a lumber mill. He said, go to central British Columbia, Prince George, in fact, where I am today. I can still see where the Greyhound station was about 2 blocks away from here. And so that's what I did. Came off the Greyhound bus, 12-hour ride up to central British Columbia in the bus, Greyhound bus. And I came off the bus, I had my suitcase, 2 books, three sets of clothes, 3 books, 2 sets of clothes, and then I counted my money at least 3 times. I had exactly $25.47. And
Wow.
I had a dream. And then the other thing that I had is that attitude. I'm always have been positive, even when everybody else was negative. I avoid negative, and I still do that today. Passion, whatever I do, I give it 125%. And then the other part is work ethic. I work harder than anybody. Even now, I usually get up at 5:30 in the morning. I always make my bed, and I always think I'm late. So, but the point that I want to make, I was successful and already successful, and everybody said, "Oh, you're so successful." I didn't feel that way, and so it was not until I walked into a bookstore here, and I found a book, and I don't know why it even got my attention. It was I was already here for 32 years. It was in January 1997. I found a book, and the title was Driven to Distraction. This is the actual book that I picked up. I don't know why, and I started looking at the book, and I wrote in the book, actually here, it would say January 1997, and I wrote in the book, it was about ADHD and dyslexia. Dr. Halliwell wrote the book, medical doctor, professor, globally well known, and that has ADHD and dyslexia. And I said, oh my God, that is me. And so I wrote in Dutch, because I was ashamed of it. It suggested it may be a mental deficiency. And I wrote in Dutch, now I finally know who I am. And so it had that kind of an effect on my life. The reason that I mentioned that part, because to a certain extent, the same could well apply to autism and other neurodiversity issues that we have, and there are many of them. And then when I started reading it, I thought maybe 6-8% of the population, maybe. And then the other point that I did is you on my podcast number 483. I have my, thank you. I have the podcast number 203 with Dr. Hollywell. And it was an interesting podcast. By then, I had been looking more and more at frequency of occurrence and needed to know what is it, what does it mean, and all those things. And when I had the discussion with Dr. Halliwell, he's the expert and I lived it, and suggesting to him that initially I thought 8 to 10% maybe in that area, and then by the time I had looked at it, it's probably closer to 20%. And he said, no, John, it's more than 25%. I agree with them. The other part is that I thought between male and female, there may be a difference. And I believe that, and he agreed, that the difference is that females display it different than males do. Comes back to the issue that you raised at autism.
Correct.
And then the other part which is interesting, and that's why I kind of shared with my personal experience about that, as it also relates to autism, I believe in a way, is that I became quite successful, at least in the eyes of others. This kind of cleared up a lot of stuff about who am I. And then I became quite successful in my businesses. I'm 10 different companies of some sort, but it's not about that. I did get a middle number, and all of that I did, but it's not about that part, but just to show it is important. And then I got to know a lot of people on board of directors and very well-connected individuals that are very, very high and very, very successful. And I came and I suggested that to Dr. Hollywell, that I believe of all the successful, and the operative is successful, individuals that I met on boardrooms, tables, primarily males, but also females, is that 50% of them, in my opinion, are ADHD. He said, no,
I
John.
think you're right.
He said, no, John, probably 75%. and that's why I mention it. And so the more I found out about it, the more I found it's a superpower. And
It
so
is.
it can, once you know what it is and how to work with it, it can become a tool to make you more successful. But the interesting part about it is that, and I found that as also in my experience of podcasting, I found a lot of people that on my podcast, this is not the only thing that I talk about, ADHD, autism, I podcast about numerous, all kinds of things. But frequently, my issue comes up and then people say, I've never told anybody, but I think I am as well. And this happens over and over and over again. So
I think having different brain waves and neurodiversity makes room for innovation. If everybody thought the same, nothing new would ever be invented. And so you have people like Steve Jobs and Elon Musk that are autistic and they think differently and they come up with wild ideas. And people always think they're crazy at first, but when it works very well, right?
the last book that I did, and this is my 5th book that I've been writing, it came out in July 31st. I wrote another book, actually, I have to show you, getting all excited about this, is that this one, I felt I had an obligation to share with others. I wrote a book about it. ADHD Unlocked was my 2nd book. And then the 5th one is this one. It's $1 billion communication skills are critically important. And the reason that I wrote this is talking about issues about ADHD and other things, but even more importantly is that what made those people billionaires. This is not about how to become a billionaire, but it's more about communication skills, self-knowledge, and who am I issues are very, very important. And I showcase 6 or 7 billionaires, including the ones that you meant, Jobs and all those other guys. I showcased them is they were good communicators for one, and either they acquired that skill, but in order to do that, you had to become knowledgeable of who are you. and they
Yep.
fit into the category of not only ADHD but many others in terms and potentially as well autism and other issues, bipolar issues in some of them, and dyslexia, and combination of all the above made them successful, and it made them different, and it goes directly to the issue that you mentioned. So, but the other point that I want to make is that I find that, and you confirm that with autism, that there is no difference in terms of ADHD. I'm not a doc, obviously, I'm just speaking from experience, but there is no difference between male and female. The female will showcase it differently than males do.
I really think that's true, but it's kind of a disadvantage because having that diagnosis is powerful. It gives you the knowledge of who you are, and it helps you take steps toward finding communication that works and harnessing it as a superpower and not as a disability. And so I think it's a disadvantage to not have the actual diagnosis, you know?
I agree.
Yeah.
And again, on that topic is so important. I can use myself as an example. When I read the book in 1997, I was already 57 years old. At that point, I went to after about 5 years, because I was ashamed of it to a certain extent, because there I'm building companies and go to the bankers and the financial people, make good proposals for finding capital for expanding
Mhm.
my companies, millions of dollars in some cases. And after I give the presentation, very convincing, I said, "Oh, by the way, I have a mental disorder as well, called ADHD," and say, "Well, have a nice day," right?
Right.
So there was still a bit of that. Not now, obviously, but then, so we've come a long way. But so what I'm saying is that at 57, it took me 5 years before I would go to my doc that delivered our two daughters and was a personal friend. And he said to me, "Hey, John, why are you here?" And I said, "I think I got ADHD." And so we checked it out, and I do at
Yeah.
62. The unfortunate
Amazing.
part, and that's really the point that I'm trying to make in a long way around this, is saying that I was born, in my mind, ADHD was always part of who I am. And
Yes.
so it affected me in grade 3, where I failed in grade 3, and say, who fails in grade 3? And then failed 3 times in grade 7,
Mm.
where they finally said, okay, well, you will never amount to much. In the opinions, and with all due respect to the teacher, but it was very frustrating at times for them. In
Yeah.
some of the
Well,
presentation, go
they
ahead,
weren't
Karen.
teaching in a way that you could learn because
Exactly.
your brain was different. You were capable of passing third grade and seventh grade, but they weren't presenting information to you in a way that you were able to absorb. And that's what happens with kids with autism in the school system. They get left behind, they get put in a corner, nobody knows what to do with them. But in ABA therapy, instead of school, it's very advantageous because each kid gets their own teacher at all times, individualized attention, and we take that curriculum and modify it to fit to the way that they know how to learn.
Yes. And then the critical part of what is the frequency of occurrence,
Mhm.
as you say, is constantly becoming higher and higher, going
Yes.
from 1 in 67 to 1 in 30, and likely maybe as much as 1 in 20. The same
Yeah.
applies to ADHD, that the
Yep.
frequency of occurrence is, in my opinion, and not being disputed by anybody, it could be well up to 30% of the population may be ADHD or ADHD
Mm.
affected with neurodiversity issues of some sort or another that will affect their ability to interact as to what we believe is, if you wish, normal. Yeah.
Right. I
So,
agree with you completely.
so what do we, from your experience, what would you recommend saying, less so with ADHD may take a while to find, but the earlier somebody is diagnosed,
Mhm.
and the more we can, is the system or the training, education, the first 5 years in a person's life are so critically important in terms of how it affects the rest of their lives. What else can we do to change the system, because it is so rapidly changing from the data as to how many are affected, that, with all due respect to my friends that are teachers, and even my youngest daughter is a teacher, very dedicated and doing a very, very good job, but the educational system is still not adapted to all the changes, and that is globally as we speak. And I realize that we cannot kind of change it overnight. It takes time. And so part of that is people like yourself, that through the frustration and all the things that go with it, saw this as an opportunity, as an
Yes.
entrepreneurial thought, and saying, what are we going to do that after the age of 5, sorry, you're out of the system. But that's just not the right thing to do, is very obvious. So where do we go from here? Because you only one person, you can only do so much. And although your franchising is working well, is it entrepreneurship that will help us here? Is it
And
the podcasts like this one will show, hopefully, people around the world, yes, that frequency of occurrence is the same. I don't care what side of the world that you're living in, the likelihood is the issues are the same.
you're so correct. The first problem we have to solve is awareness. And I think we've gotten better at it. People like you didn't have access to the definition of ADHD when you were a child,
Didn't
and
with
you
us.
they didn't recognize that in you. Your parents didn't know, your teachers didn't know, your doctors didn't know. And I think now knowledge is power, and we're better able to recognize the symptoms. I think with social media and better internet and all the communication that we have around the world, awareness has gotten better for all neurodiversity. um, but the next step is, okay, now that we know about it, how do we fix it? And that's the reason why I franchised my company. Just as you said it perfectly. I'm only one person. I can open one clinic in Houston, Texas. I can open two clinics in Houston, Texas, but I can't be in Canada and New York and California. I can't be all these places at once. So franchising the business was my solution. And now all I do all day long is teach aspiring entrepreneurs how to open up their own ABA clinic. I show them how to get the licenses. I tell them how to form their business entity, what kind of building they need. I help them hire the autism professionals because, just like me, I didn't have any experience in this. We hire the correct people and we put it together. And now it's not just me owning a clinic. I now have 77 different people with their clinics sprinkled around the US. And hopefully soon we will move out to Canada. We will move out to the UK, maybe Australia, starting with the English speaking countries first, because expanding into different speaking languages is difficult. But this is just one step. And to your point, the schools aren't ready to handle this. They're not equipped to handle this. They're not trained to handle this. They're teachers, and the school systems and the curriculums are designed for neurotypical children who have the ability to sit in a desk for 8 hours and focus on somebody talking. ADHD can't do that.
No,
Autism can't do that.
no.
We need to move. We need to learn with our hands instead of with our ears. We need visual input. We need real world learning to be incorporated into these lessons to make it generalized knowledge that can help them into their adult lives. And
So,
so it's got to be a movement
so,
to solve the
so what
problem.
I find interesting about it, Nichole, first and foremost, from somebody that is ADHD, has neurodiversity issues, obviously, and dyslexia, and then has been struggling with that for virtually 60 years. And so can you imagine that I left grade 7, failed grade 7 for the third time. I was 12 and a half years old and became a laborer. And I'm proud of that today, but then it was looked down on. My friends went to college, to university, and and then being told by the teachers, and I don't take that for the teacher. I don't. Most of the I have great respect for teachers in
Mm.
our system, even under the current system. But this is so critically important, but so sizable in numbers that it will be a gradual process. Recognize it first. It's
Mhm.
not a liability. It's not, you can be successful in spite of it or so what I say with my ADHD is I was not successful in spite of it. I was successful because of it. And then the other part, when I give presentation, I talk about failing grade 7 3 times, blah blah blah, and all the other kind of things, is saying that some of the questions that I get is, say, people would say, so does it still bother you, because it sounds like it does. And I said, it does. Every day I think about it. I should have quit earlier.
Yeah.
Tongue in
You
cheek.
missed out, but they just didn't know.
They didn't know.
They just didn't know how to recognize it, how to help you, and you did miss out because of it. And a lot of kids today still miss out because of it. But I do believe that it's getting better, and that if we all create more awareness and more solutions, that we can make a better future for our kids.
And I agree, and that is global. So understanding it first and foremost is critically important. That's why
Yes.
podcasts between people like yourself and myself around the world, and people will be watching it around the world, are so critically important. So
Yes.
what then would you suggest that? Yeah, did you write a book about it, or did you have?
I did. I wrote my very first book. I don't have five like you. You're like a seasoned author. But I wrote my very first book, and it's basically the story of how I became a stepmom and had this problem, and then started because I my clinic is the very first franchise model in the entire industry. And I had no peers and no one to ask questions to. I was 28 years old when I started this company. So I was like this baby that had no idea what she was doing, with no experience, flying by the seat of my pants, just doing what I was hoping was right for my kid and for other kids alike. And I think it's a good testament to, you don't have to know everything to help. You don't have to have it all figured out right now to make steps toward progress. You know a
Exactly.
little bit, you do it, you learn a little bit more, and you just kind of go from there.
But don't treat it as a liability. Do not look
Yeah,
at it, as
yeah,
saying that you are lesser than because of it. But in spite of it, you will be, and you will approach life differently. And it
yeah.
is what I liked. What you said is that what happens to, the is that it is more a question of delay more so than anything else. It is not a question of not that they get there, but autism
Right.
is more a question of delaying some of the
Yes.
progress that we believe are natural in a person or young child that is growing up through the early stages from 2 to 3 and maybe even less than that, right up to 5. But it's troubling to me,
Mm.
ABA, that in some regions, I presume, I don't know where it applies, that it would stop at 5 would be something to me that would be troubling and not don't qualify. Have you got a copy of your book there close by?
I don't have a physical copy next to me, no.
Okay, so give us the title of the book once more that you have. Is it available?
It's available. It's on Amazon. It's on Spotify, um, Barnes and Noble. It is called Charting New Waters: The Story Behind Success on the Spectrum by Nichole Daher.
Okay,
And it's audiobook, electronic book, physical. We have it all.
Okay, because we kind of want to see what it looks like at some point. But so the title is.
Charting New Waters, the story behind success on the spectrum.
So what we will try to do is kind of find a copy of it. There is probably somewhere a copy that we can incorporate into this podcast before we release it 2 hours from now. But it may take us a little bit longer to get it incorporated because we want to show that particular title. So the other part then, Nichole, is that what other contact points do you have for your franchise? And that the name of the franchise is, success on the spectrum of facing autism. So, what is the name of the franchise?
So, if you're looking for more information about opening your own ABA clinic, you can visit our website, sosfranchising.com. And we have all kinds of videos that you can watch that shows you what ABA therapy inside of a clinic looks like. And then, of course, what you would do as an owner of an ABA clinic, because obviously you're not expected to give the care to the children directly, but you're running a business. You're the boss. You do the payroll and the performance reviews and the hiring and the firing. You're the administrative side. But we need more. We need more people that recognize neurodiversity, more people that are willing to make a difference in these kids' lives. And it's a profitable business on top of it all. And so it's something that's not going away. It's in high demand. The demand is only getting higher. And so it's a sound, recession-proof, truly passionate and philanthropic business where you can have a purpose and make profit at the same time.
So, for somebody that is watching this, saying that, I'm interested in that, what would their qualifications be like? Would they have a health care certificate of some description?
You
Or is
don't
it
need a degree, you don't need experience, but you do need people skills
right?
because to be a CEO of a company, you're leading your employees, you're helping them find their goals and reach them. And so if you have people skills, you have leadership skills, and you're organized in your head enough to press a button and run payroll in a software, then anybody can be the CEO of an SOS company. But it's got to come from the heart. You can't just do it for the profit. You've got to have the mission driven purpose behind it.
So I hear a couple of things: ABA, and then an SOS company.
Oh,
So
success on the spectrum, I like to shorten it because it's such a long word. Everybody was tripping over it. So I call success on the spectrum, I shorten it to SOS.
okay, so yeah, and so that is then. So how would then be a company that started? How would they be called then? Company
They would operate under the brand name Success on the Spectrum. And we could
SOS.
say it's the New York location, it's the Detroit location, it's the Atlanta location.
Yeah,
So everybody has Success on the Spectrum and then their area.
and then and the specialty is ABA
Correct.
as it relates to autism in particular, right? Is it special to autism, male as well as female?
I'm so glad you asked this question. ABA therapy is effective across all genders. It's effective across all ages, even into adults. But ABA therapy is just a specialized method of learning. It does work for kids with ADD and ADHD. However, at least in the American healthcare system, your health insurance will only pay for that therapy if you're diagnosed with autism. I think in the future that it may be to where they will start paying for ADHD kids to attend ABA therapy instead of school because it is helpful and they are successful and it is a better learning environment for them. I know that Canada does have ABA therapy systems that are paid for by the healthcare system. But again, so few clinics, so many kids. not everybody has access to it.
So would it be, I'm just throwing stuff out here in my mind, neurodiversity issues have a
Mhm.
category of different, including autism, ADHD, dyslexia, on and on and on and on. Would it
Yes.
would it not make sense from a government perspective that once you're being recognized as neurodivergent issue, that then automatically you would fall under that umbrella, or would that
Wouldn't
scare
that
them?
be the perfect world?
Yeah,
It would be the perfect world. It hasn't happened yet. And I think it's an inevitability. I
it
think
is.
that schools are going to have to realize that they're not equipped to help these kids. And if we want a better, more successful society of adults, we have to help our children grow into those adults.
So once we recognize and accept, and I believe that more and more, so I've mentioned it
Mhm.
numerous times since my interview with Dr. Hollywell, and having had so many people on my podcast that have issues around that under the umbrella, and not only autism, ADHD, but many others, that it is just a matter of time politically that people
Yep.
will realize that it's to their benefit to recognize it under the umbrella of neurodivergency, because an ADHD alone, we believe it is
Yes.
probably 30% of the population may be ADHD. And I've seen it over and over and over and over and over again on our podcast, that people saying, I've never talked to anybody, but I've never said it to people. I hear it over and over and over again. And I understand it, because that's what, even when I was diagnosed at the time, that it took me 5 years when I saw the book and saying, oh my God, that's me. It took me 5 years to go to my doc, who's my personal friend and delivered out through
Affirmative.
doc, because it implied in my mind that I had a mental disorder. And
Hmm.
even now, still, I know there are people that say, I see it over and over and over again, is saying that, I never told anybody this, but blah, 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 blah. So that's where it starts. And then from the politicians, knowing that most politicians now in the United States and in Canada, in my mind, and so know that the system as we have it today is not functioning well, could well
No.
approach up to 25, 30% of the students are not being effectively
Well,
recognized in terms of their ability to learn, and that must be addressed at some point. But when it becomes politically beneficial, both in Canada, around the
mhm.
world, and in the United States, to the politicians, will they then say, okay, we need to do this, like with things like autism, that OBA, ABA, and maybe say once more ABA stands for?
Applied behavior analysis.
So if after 5 years old you say, okay, you're done, out, you know, it simply does not make sense. And
No.
so and so the same applies to ADHD, dyslexia, and I can go on and on and on. If it applies to 1/3 of our population, male and female, then that is critical, and it becomes politically influential to the politician and recognizing it. Because I would love to have a politician on my podcast that would say, no, we should not finance any of that. I would like that. So
That would
please,
be suicide.
and I say, and I don't care if you're in the United States, I don't care if you're Democrat or Republican, or in Canada, liberal or conservative, come on my podcast and say you don't see this as an issue or a problem. I would love to
Right.
have you. And
Right.
so, but for the ones that do not recognize this, it will become an issue and is a problem. And the sooner
Mm.
they recognize it, because that's the first thing, and see it politically beneficial to them, whatever party they are part of, then
Mhm.
it will become an issue that will create more awareness that must be done, because it is not if, but when. And being early on some of these progressive items politically, for those that have ambitions to become politicians. I'm not one of them. So, but it's important.
It is important. There was actually a study done by United Optum in the United States that said, why are we paying for all of these kids to have specialized instruction? What benefit does it give us? And they looked at the cost of ABA therapy that a child would get from, let's say, 2 years old to 7 years old, which is average. How much does that cost? Well, it costs $1 million. Okay, well, what does that result? How does that help us as a society? And they discovered that paying for ABA therapy when a child is young and giving them that support as a child translates to a savings of millions of dollars in healthcare later, because now they can communicate when something feels bad and you catch the problems earlier, and it's preventative care and not intervention. And then you have kids that eat better because they understand about nutrition. And then they have kids that are now able to grow up, get jobs, and live on their own instead of being a burden to society by being in assisted living or in nursing homes or in care homes. And so by giving them the skills that they need when they're young, it benefits society so much. It saves tax dollars, it saves healthcare dollars, it benefits. So if a politician would be so brave as to take on this mission, it would benefit everyone, not just the families who are directly affected, but everyone that's around them.
And for the politician that we hope they think that way, that would be good for everybody, but it'd be good for them as a politician.
Yes,
Getting a
it
good
would. I
salary,
vote for
being
them.
very important, and becoming a lifetime politician for them.
Yeah.
That's the most important part in a lot of cases, respectfully.
Yeah.
But for self-serving, it would be beneficial, and the time is now.
The time is now. The
Nichole,
time now is to change.
I love it. So, for all those people watching us from around the world, is that if you like my podcast and anything that Nichole is doing as well, and stay in touch with her, look her up on on the web and on her podcast that she is on or is doing. Then, as a guest, subscribe to us. It encourages me and others to do more of these programs. Like it if you like it, share it with others, comment on it if you want to see something different. And Nichole, it was a pleasure and a privilege to have you on my podcast and sharing it around the world. It will be released in 2 hours, and it will be unedited as we presented it.
Thank you for having me so much. And please pat yourself on the back for the good work that you do, the successes that you've made, the strength that you had to take to overcome all of your troubles. You're doing good work. You're bringing knowledge to the world. I appreciate it. We all appreciate it. 5 stars for John.
Thanks, Nichole. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
Take care. Bye.